What's good? Another beautiful day. Just another Saturday, right? Tomorrow's Sunday. I don't know why, but I keep doing these videos late. I think I just like it late, personally. But continuing on, we're going over not verses, but chapters 24 through 28, with a little bit of a mini story in the middle. Overall, so chapter 24 is a continuation of chapter 23, where Paul is pretty much accused, right? And they have a plot to kill Paul, the Jews, right? So pretty much, the Jews are just like, yeah, to Felix, who's the centurion or whatever at this point, and they're like, yeah, this guy, he's a plague to us, right? Just straight up. They literally say he's a plague in verse 5 of chapter 24, right? And pretty much Paul's like, yeah, bro, no, all right, I'm just preaching Christ, right? And Felix is like, you know what, I'll have somebody else, handle this. But how about you just go sit in prison for a little bit and, do whatever, right? And Felix ends up getting the word from Paul and everything, with his wife. What's her name? Drusilla, who's also a Jew. So Paul was talking to her and him about Jesus Christ, and for some reason, Felix was expecting him to pay his way out of prison and ended up keeping him there until his change of command happened with a guy named Porcius Festus, which, I mean, sounds weird as a name, right? And pretty much desiring to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison, which is the last verse of chapter 24, right? And then continuing on from there, in chapter 25, it pretty much starts with like Paul talking to Festus and everything, and pretty much going through the motions. And Festus is like, would you like to go to Jerusalem and whatnot and do their court and whatnot? And Paul's like, nah, I'm a Roman citizen. And pretty much says, let me appeal to Caesar, right? And Festus is like, you can go appeal to Caesar, right? And whatnot. And, yeah, to Caesar, you will pretty much go, right? And he ends up talking to this guy named King Agrippa, Agrippa, um, with Bernice as well, whoever that is. That is not really ringing a bell for me. But they end up talking and whatnot, and then pretty much, Agrippa, or yeah, Agrippa ends up, understanding Paul and's like, yeah, this man didn't do anything wrong. If he didn't try to go appeal to Caesar, I would have let him go right here and there, right? But God works in mysterious ways, right? So I don't know if it wasn't obvious. That was chapter 26 and 27, just a little more condensed because Paul also talks about a little bit, well, a recap of pretty much his whole journey up until this point, and how he literally was on the road to Damascus and saw God. So, um, yeah. But for a little mini story, right? I have one of the, devotional Bibles, whatnot, and has many devotions in here and whatnot. And pretty much, this is an interesting one, right? Where, I just want to take out one good story from it, which was, he met this, or whoever wrote this devotional, ended up meeting, uh, what's his name, a bishop, right? And saw a gold chain on him, and it was like, it's kind of weird and whatnot. And he pretty much judged him for it, right? But once asking about the golden chain, right, and the golden cross, he got a whole story behind it, right? So pretty much, he used to be at one place and whatnot, with other people at another church, right? he used to he left behind another church, right, that he wanted to be in and whatnot, but he felt God was calling him somewhere else, and he ended up leaving, right? And in order, well, pretty much their parting gift to the church was 250 or no 242 households contributed gold pieces to make him that cross. You know, a lot of the stories were from hurt and pain, and all that hurt and pain came into the cross and pretty much made it what it was. And that's the devotional is pretty much pointing that to the idea of the early church. The early church is all this pain and everything becoming a benefit for not just one, but everybody, right? Because of benefiting that one, if that makes sense, right? That one being Jesus. At least is how I interpret it, right? Um, but yeah. So now in chapter 27, they're on a boat and they're on their way to Rome because they're trying to go see Caesar, right? And pretty much they're trying to make it to Phoenix because, they spend the winter there and it's cold and everything, and they're pretty much without food for a while. And all of a sudden, a storm happens on sea, right? Um, and end up pretty much taking all the people on board of the ship off into a whole direction, different direction, right? And then continuing on, Paul pretty much says, y'all should have listened to me the first time, because he told them, uh, uh, where is it exactly? He says in verse 10, Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also our lives. But they didn't pay attention to him when he gave that warning, right? But Paul's like, guys, it is what it is, right? The Lord has given me a message and a vision that we will survive, guys. So don't even worry about it, right? Which, low-key, he's right. Not even low-key, it's high-key, he's right. He got the vision. So the 14th night came, of fasting pretty much. And the sailors suspected they were reaching land. And then Paul said, eat the food so you have energy and everything. And then they end up shipwrecking onto an island called, give me a second, Malta. All right. And then when they made to Malta, they're talking to these natives people and everything. I can't really tell if they're like natives or if they're like still like, I don't want to say colonized, but they're up to date with the affairs of the world and everything. Not like the Native Americans, like thinking like regular people at that time, right? Um, but pretty much Paul's trying to make a fire. Yeah, and a viper comes and wraps around his arm and whatnot, a poisonous one, I would say, right? And is it biting him? And people there are like, he must be a murderer, right? Because, the viper bit him and everything, right? And I'm guessing they thought he was going to die from it, right? And he doesn't die. He just lives and nothing happens to him and whatnot, by the grace of God. And simply after that, they ended up calling him a god, right? Which it's kind of cooked. I'm sure Paul probably corrected them. No, he definitely corrected them for sure. But pretty much Paul or Publius gave them hospitality, because they're guests and whatnot. And Publius' father was sick with dysentery and something else, with fever and just dysentery. And Paul prayed and visited him and pretty much cured him with the grace of God. And then the people around him started coming to him, to get help for their sicknesses and whatnot. And Paul cured them too, which ended up leading to, not Paul curing them, but God curing them. I'd say that. Something in my spirit was saying that. But they hopped onto a ship where, the people gave them, or not the people, but the king gave them a bunch of resources to work with, right? On their way to Rome. So they end up hitting Rome and whatnot. And, Paul luckily gets to stay alone with the guard who can protect him and whatnot, or watch him, or whatever, right? And pretty much he ends up going to talk to the local leaders of the Jews and everything, and ends up, saying, guys, the Jews of Asia are coming after me. I came here to appeal to Caesar. Please believe me, right? And ends up trying to convince them of the Lord, right? And then some of the Pharisees are like, yeah, they can see why, we worship him, right? And they start to believe, and then some obviously don't, because you're going to have some, it never really fails. I will say, even out of Jesus' 12 apostles, still one betrayed him, and then many of them doubted. Actually, I think all of them doubted. Uh, but keeping it going, pretty much they all departed after he said one quote, pretty much, right? And he said, I'll read verbatim, right? Starting from 25, verse 25, and chapter 28 of Acts. The Holy Spirit was right in saying to your fathers, the prophet, through Isaiah the prophet, go to this people and say, you will indeed hear but never understand, and you will indeed see but not perceive. For this people's heart will grow dull, and with their eyes they can barely hear. In their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, turn, and I would heal them. Therefore, let it be known to you that the salvation of God has been sent to the Gentiles. They will listen, right? And again, the Jews don't like hearing that the Gentiles are getting saved just like they are, right? Which, it could also be a reflection of how it is nowadays, right? I hope not, but, you never know. But yeah, that's everything for today. Hope you all enjoyed. Read the word. Deuces.